Sandra Bullock, one of Hollywood's most beloved actresses, quietly pulled into the driveway of her modest home on the outskirts of Austin. Her 12-year-old SUV made a concerning noise as she turned off the engine, the same troubling sound that had been growing louder for weeks. To her, it was just another day and another errand to add to her list, but what was about to happen would change everything, and when the truth about her came to light, the consequences would be more than surprising. They would be unforgettable. Before we continue this story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel because tomorrow we have another special story for you. It was a beautiful spring morning in Texas with golden sunlight filtering through the oak trees like a promise of better days ahead. Sandra stepped out of her vehicle and patted the hood affectionately. "I think we've reached the end of our journey together, old friend," she whispered to the car that had faithfully carried her for nearly a decade, far from the glamorous vehicles many would expect from an Oscar-winning actress. Sandra walked into her kitchen, tossed her keys onto the counter, and called her longtime mechanic, Roberto. "I hate to be the bearer of bad news, Sandy," Roberto said after she described the latest symptoms, "but that transmission is finally giving out. At this point, repairs would cost more than the car is worth." Sandra sighed, glancing out the window at the faded blue SUV sitting in her driveway. Unlike many of her Hollywood peers, she had never been one for flashy possessions or status symbols. The car had been perfect for her needs, reliable, inconspicuous, and spacious enough for the work that truly mattered to her. "I suppose it's time," she said, a hint of sadness in her voice. "Thanks for everything, Roberto." After ending the call, Sandra pulled out her laptop and began researching. This wasn't just about replacing a vehicle. It was about finding something that could serve a greater purpose. For years, Sandra had been working quietly with foster children, away from the cameras and publicity that followed her film career. She had started a foundation that provided resources, experiences, and support to children transitioning between homes or aging out of the system. These kids had faced enough uncertainty in their lives, and Sandra had dedicated herself to being a consistent presence for them. The right vehicle wasn't a luxury for her, it was a necessity for her work. She needed something that could comfortably transport groups of teenagers on outdoor excursions, something reliable enough to navigate both city streets and rural backroads, and something that wouldn't break down in the middle of nowhere with vulnerable kids inside. "Maybe something with better off-road capabilities this time," she murmured to herself, scrolling through various models, "and definitely more seating." Her assistant, Mia, walked in with a cup of coffee and peered over Sandra's shoulder. "Cara, shopping?" she asked, placing the steaming mug beside the laptop. Roberto just confirmed what we already knew. "The transmission's finally giving out," Sandra replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. "I need something that can handle those camping trips we've been planning for the older kids." Mia nodded, understanding immediately. "The ones who are about to age out of the system. The wilderness therapy program." "Exactly," Sandra said, her eyes lighting up despite her frustration about the car. "These kids need to learn self-reliance and teamwork before they're on their own. I want to be able to take them to those remote spots we scouted, but my current car barely makes it up my driveway these days." Mia sat down next to her. "What about that new hybrid SUV model, the one with the modular seating arrangements?" Sandra shook her head. "Too flashy. I need something sturdy but not attention-grabbing." After hours of research, Sandra found herself drawn to a particular model, a customizable SUV known for its durability and versatility. It wasn't a standard showroom vehicle, but something that could be adapted to specific needs. According to the manufacturer's website, only a few dealerships in Texas offered this level of customization. One name kept appearing in her searches: Precision Motors, an upscale dealership that specialized in both luxury vehicles and high-end customization. "This could be perfect," Sandra told Mia, showing her the features. "We could modify the rear cargo area for the camping equipment, add the extra seating, and still have room for the art supplies and books." Mia raised an eyebrow. "Precision Motors? Aren't they that super exclusive place near downtown? The one that sold that ridiculous gold-plated sports car to that tech billionaire last year?" Sandra grimaced slightly. "They may cater to that crowd, But they're the only authorized customization center for this model in the state. It's worth checking out at least. Later that evening, as Sandra prepared dinner in her kitchen, far from the personal chefs many assumed she employed, she reflected on her decision. Tomorrow she would visit Precision Motors. She wouldn't call ahead or make special arrangements. There would be no red carpet treatment or VIP appointments. Sandra Bullock, who had won the hearts of millions through her talent, humility, and genuine nature, would walk into that dealership as just another customer. She would dress as she normally did when not on a film set or red carpet, simply, comfortably, with no intention of drawing attention to herself. What she didn't know was that this decision, this simple quest for a new vehicle, would set in motion a chain of events that would reveal not just who she was beyond the fame, but who others truly were beneath their polished veneers. By the time the sun set the following day, a truth would emerge that would resonate far beyond the walls of that dealership. Little did Sandra know that sometimes the most profound moments of change begin with the most ordinary of intentions, and that sometimes true character is revealed not in the spotlight, but in the shadows where no one thinks they're being watched. The following morning dawned clear and bright as Sandra prepared for her visit to Precision Motors. She stood before her closet, bypassing the designer outfits reserved for premieres and press tours. Instead, she reached for a pair of well-worn jeans, a simple navy sweater, and comfortable sneakers. Her only concession to potential recognition was a baseball cap and sunglasses, not as a statement but as a practical measure to avoid unwanted attention. "Just another Tuesday," she murmured to herself as she pulled her hair into a casual ponytail and tucked it through the back of the E-cap. Sandra drove her struggling SUV one last time, the familiar rattling sound, a constant reminder of why this errand was necessary. As she approached the dealership, the Austin skyline gleaming in the distance, she couldn't help but notice how the building itself seemed designed to intimidate. Precision Motors stood like a modern cathedral to luxury, all gleaming glass and polished steel, with a carefully manicured landscape surrounding it. She pulled into the visitor parking area, choosing a spot far from the entrance. Before getting out, she took a deep breath and reminded herself of her purpose, finding the right vehicle for the foster children who counted on her. This wasn't about her. It never had been. As Sandra walked toward the entrance, she noticed her reflection in the glass facade, an ordinary woman on an ordinary mission. The automatic doors slid open with a whisper, revealing an interior that redefined opulence. The showroom floor gleamed so perfectly that it seemed almost liquid, reflecting the immaculate vehicles displayed like precious artifacts in a museum. The air carried the unmistakable scent of new leather and expensive cologne, and soft classical music played through hidden speakers. Sandra paused just inside the entrance, taking in the scene. Well-dressed salespeople moved efficiently between display vehicles and customers, most of whom were dressed in business attire or designer casual wear that cost more than many people's monthly rent. No one immediately noticed her entrance, a rarity in her public life that she found refreshing rather than insulting. She moved deeper into the showroom, past sleek sports cars with price tags that could fund several years of college tuition. Her attention was drawn to the specialized section where utility vehicles were displayed. There, positioned under strategic lighting that emphasized its robust frame, was the model she had researched, the Meridian Atlas Pro. Sandra approached it slowly, appreciating its practical design. Unlike the other vehicles in the showroom that screamed status and speed, this one promised durability and function. She ran her hand along its exterior, peeking through the windows to examine the interior configuration. This could work, she thought, mentally calculating how the space could be optimized for the wilderness therapy program she was developing. She could already envision the modified seating arrangement, the specialized storage compartments, and the reinforced suspension system that would allow access to the remote areas where the therapy sessions would take place. As she circled the vehicle, Sandra became aware of subtle changes in the atmosphere around her. A few salespeople had glanced her way, but quickly returned their attention to more promising-looking prospects. One salesman in particular, tall with artificially whitened teeth and a custom suit that seemed molded to his frame, had looked directly at her before dismissively turning away. Sandra wasn't bothered. Throughout her life and career, she had encountered people who judged based on appearances. She continued her examination of the vehicle, opening the driver's side door to get a feel for the interior. "Excuse me," she called, politely to a passing saleswoman. "Could I get some information about customization options for this model?" The woman, whose name badge identified her as Claire, glanced at Sandra with a professional but distant smile. "Of course, Victor handles all our specialty vehicles. I'll see if he's available." Sandra nodded her thanks and continued exploring the vehicle while waiting. She checked the cargo space, mentally measuring it against the equipment lists she'd prepared with the program counselors. The third-row seating could be modified, perhaps removed entirely in favor of secure storage for wilderness gear and emergency supplies. Several minutes passed with no sign of Victor. Sandra noticed that Claire had approached the well-dressed man she'd observed earlier, who was now engaged with customers wearing clothes that probably cost more than many people's monthly salary. He nodded in Sandra's direction, but made no move to disengage from his current conversation. Rather than interrupt, Sandra decided to continue her self-guided tour. She found the manufacturer's information sheet attached to the window and began reading through the specifications. The vehicle's capabilities were impressive: all-wheel drive with advanced traction control, adjustable suspension for varying terrain, enhanced safety features, and a modular interior design that could be customized for specific needs. "Perfect," she whispered, her enthusiasm growing despite the lukewarm reception. From across the showroom, whispered conversations and subtle glances were directed her way. A young man behind the reception desk kept looking at her with a furrowed brow, as if trying to place her face. Sandra was accustomed to this, the moment of uncertain recognition that preceded either respectful acknowledgement or intrusive attention. 30 minutes had passed, and still no salesperson had approached her. Sandra had completed her inspection of the vehicle and was now sitting in the driver's seat, adjusting the controls and getting a feel for the ergonomics. The seats were comfortable but sturdy, another point in favor of this model for the long drives to remote locations she was planning. Finally, Victor approached, his expression a study in professional disinterest. He paused a few feet from the vehicle, looking first at the car and then at Sandra, with an appraising glance that took in her casual attire and unassuming presence. "Looking at the Atlas Pro?" he asked, his tone suggesting that perhaps she had wandered into the wrong section, or the wrong dealership entirely. Sandra stepped out of the vehicle and extended her hand. "Yes, I am. I'm particularly interested in the customization options. I understand Precision Motors is the only authorized center in Texas that can make the modifications I need." Victor shook her hand with reluctance, his grip purposely light, as if afraid her ordinary status might somehow be contagious. "Customization starts at $40,000, above base price depending on what you're looking for." His tone carried a clear implication. Perhaps this wasn't the right place for her. What he didn't know, what he couldn't see beyond her baseball cap and casual clothes, was that Sandra Bullock was about to teach him the most expensive lesson of his career. "As I mentioned, customization starts at $40,000 above base price," Victor repeated, emphasizing the number while subtly looking Sandra up and down. "The Atlas Pro itself begins at $97,000 before any additions." Sandra nodded, unfazed by the figures. "I understand. I've researched the pricing already. What I'm interested in are the specific modifications that can be made to the interior configuration and suspension system." Victor's eyebrows rose slightly, the first crack in his dismissive demeanor. He hadn't expected this seemingly ordinary woman to be so well informed or to continue the conversation after hearing the price point. "Well," he said, his tone still carrying a note of doubt, "we would need to discuss your requirements in detail. These customizations aren't simple add-ons. They require substantial engineering considerations." "I'm aware," Sandra replied calmly. "I'm looking to modify the third-row seating area into a secure cargo space with specialized compartments, upgrade to all-terrain tires, reinforce the suspension for off-road durability, and potentially add auxiliary power outlets throughout the vehicle." Victor blinked, momentarily speechless at her specific knowledge. He recovered quickly, professional instinct taking over despite his lingering skepticism. "Those are extensive modifications. May I ask what you'll be using the vehicle for?" His question carried an undertone of challenge, as if he couldn't imagine a legitimate reason for her to need such features. "I work with teenagers in an outdoor education program," Sandra answered truthfully, though deliberately vague about her foundation. "We take regular trips to remote areas for wilderness therapy sessions. The vehicle needs to be reliable on difficult terrain while safely transporting both people and equipment." As she spoke, Sandra noticed a change in the atmosphere around them. Several employees had drifted closer, ostensibly arranging brochures or checking inventory on nearby vehicles, but clearly eavesdropping on the conversation. One young woman behind the reception desk was looking at her phone, then at Sandra, then back at her phone again, her eyes widening slightly each time. Victor maintained his professional smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That sounds interesting. However, I should mention that our customization process is quite selective. We typically work with clients who have established relationships with our dealership." Sandra met his gaze directly. "I understand, and I'm prepared to establish that relationship today, provided the vehicle can meet my specifications." Before Victor could respond, the door to a glass-walled office at the rear of the showroom opened, and a woman emerged. She moved with the confident stride of someone accustomed to authority, her tailored pantsuit and immaculate hairstyle projecting an image of polished professionalism. Her gaze swept across the showroom before landing on Victor and Sandra. "Victor, how are we doing over here?" she asked as she approached, her voice carrying the practiced warmth of someone who had mastered the art of sounding sincere without necessarily being so. "Margaret," Victor said, visibly relieved at the interruption. "This is—" He paused, realizing he hadn't asked for Sandra's name. "Sandra," she supplied simply, extending her hand. "I'm interested in the Atlas Pro with some specific customizations." Margaret took her hand briefly, her grip firm but quick to withdraw. Her eyes performed the same evaluative scan that Victor's had, taking in Sandra's casual attire and unassuming presence. "I see," Margaret said, her smile tightening almost imperceptibly. "Victor, would you mind checking if we have the customization catalog for this model? I believe it's in my office." The request was clearly a pretext to speak privately, but Victor played along, nodding and walking toward the office. Margaret turned back to Sandra. "While he's getting that, perhaps I can answer any initial questions you might have." "I'm Margaret Winters, the sales director here at Precision Motors." Sandra maintained her friendly demeanor. "Nice to meet you, Margaret. As I was telling Victor, I need a vehicle that can handle regular trips to remote areas with a group of teenagers. The Atlas Pro seems ideal with the right modifications." Margaret's expression shifted subtly, a mixture of doubt and condescension, crossing her features before she masked it with professionalism. "I see. And these trips are for wilderness therapy," Sandra explained. "The kids I work with benefit tremendously from structured outdoor experiences. It builds confidence, teamwork skills, and resilience." "How commendable," Margaret said, her tone suggesting anything but genuine admiration. "Though I must say the Atlas Pro represents a significant investment. Our financing options do require excellent credit and substantial income verification." The implication was clear. Margaret didn't believe Sandra could afford the vehicle. Before Sandra could respond, Victor returned without any catalogue in hand, confirming that the errand had indeed been a pretext. "Margaret," he said quietly, leaning in to speak in a hushed tone that Sandra could still hear perfectly. "The Atlas Pro's customization package is our premium offering. Perhaps we should discuss the more accessible options we have available?" Margaret nodded, turning back to Sandra with a smile that had grown even more artificial. "Sandra," Victor raises, "an excellent point. We have several pre-owned SUVs that might better suit your budget and still meet your charitable needs." Sandra took a deep breath, maintaining her composure despite the growing tension. "I appreciate the suggestion, but I've researched extensively, and the Atlas Pro is specifically what I need. If you're concerned about financing, I can assure you that won't be an issue." Margaret's smile tightened further. "Of course. It's just that these vehicles attract a certain clientele. Professionals, executives, people who understand the value of such an investment. And you don't believe I'm part of that clientele? Sandra asked directly, her voice calm, but with an edge of firmness that hadn't been there before. The atmosphere in the showroom grew palpably tense. Several customers had stopped their own conversations to observe the interaction, while staff members pretended not to notice while stealing glances. "I didn't say that," Margaret replied, her tone growing defensive. "I'm simply trying to ensure you find the right vehicle for your situation. The Atlas Pro may be excessive for carpooling teenagers to camping trips." Sandra stood her ground, her patience wearing thin, but her dignity intact. "I'd still like to discuss the customization options for the Atlas Pro. If you're not interested in helping me with that, perhaps there's another dealership in Austin that can." Margaret's professional veneer began to crack, revealing the disdain beneath. "Look, I'm trying to save us all some time here. This isn't the kind of vehicle that someone just walks in off the street to purchase, especially for shuttling around troubled kids." The words hung in the air, harsh and revealing. Several gasps came from nearby customers and staff. Victor looked uncomfortable, as if even he recognized his boss had crossed a line. Sandra's expression remained calm, but her eyes had hardened. What neither Margaret nor Victor realized was that beneath the baseball cap and casual clothes stood not just any customer, but a woman whose determination and dignity would soon teach them the most expensive lesson of their careers. A heavy silence filled the showroom following Margaret's harsh words. Sandra took a measured breath, her eyes never leaving the sales director's face. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, but carried a weight that commanded attention. "Those troubled kids, as you call them, are children who have experienced more hardship in their short lives than most adults ever will," Sandra said. "They deserve the same respect and opportunities as anyone else who walks through your doors." Margaret's expression flickered between embarrassment and defensiveness. She glanced around, suddenly aware of the audience their confrontation had attracted. Several customers were watching openly now, some with disapproving expressions directed at the sales team rather than at Sandra. "I didn't mean to imply," Margaret began, but Sandra gently raised her hand. "I understand exactly what you meant," Sandra said. "Now I'd still like to discuss the Atlas Pro's customization options. If that's not possible, I'll take my business elsewhere." Something in Margaret's demeanor hardened. Perhaps it was the public challenge to her authority, or the realization that this unassuming woman wouldn't be easily dismissed. Whatever the cause, her professional mask slipped further. "Let's be realistic," Margaret said, lowering her voice but unable to disguise her condescension. "The Atlas Pro, fully customized as you're describing, would cost well over $150,000. That's a significant investment, one that requires careful consideration of whether it's appropriate for your stated purpose." Sandra nodded thoughtfully. "You're right about one thing. It is a significant investment. That's precisely why I've researched this model specifically and come to your dealership. Now, will you show me the customization options, or should I speak with your general manager instead?" Margaret's face flushed at the mention of her superior. Victor, still standing nearby, shifted uncomfortably on his feet. The young woman at the reception desk had abandoned any pretense of work and was now openly watching the exchange, her phone held loosely in her hand as if she had been about to use it but became too engrossed in the unfolding scene. "That won't be necessary," Margaret said tightly. "Victor can assist you, though I must insist you understand that our customization process involves a significant deposit, 20%, non-refundable." "I'm aware of industry standards," Sandra replied evenly. "Shall we proceed?" Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. She gestured stiffly toward the vehicle. "Victor, please show Ms. I'm sorry, I didn't catch your last name." Sandra smiled slightly. "Just Sandra is fine for now." The deliberate withholding of her last name seemed to further irritate Margaret, whose customer service veneer was cracking by the second. She nodded curtly and turned as if to leave, but then stopped. Something in her expression changed, a calculation forming behind her eyes. "Actually," Margaret said, turning back, "before we proceed, I believe we should confirm that we're not wasting each other's time. Our customization clients typically provide proof of financing capability before we begin the detailed design process. Victor looked increasingly uncomfortable. Margaret, I don't think that's our usual— It is now, Margaret interrupted sharply. We've had time wasters before, Victor. People who come in, drain our resources, and have no intention or ability to make a purchase. I'm simply being efficient. Sandra maintained her composure, though a slight flush had risen to her cheeks. Not from embarrassment, but from a growing indignation she kept carefully in check. I assure you, Sandra said, I'm capable of purchasing this vehicle. Now, if you'd be willing to show me the customization options— I'm sorry, Margaret interrupted, her tone making it clear she was anything but sorry. But I need more than assurances. Perhaps you'd like to provide some preliminary financial information? Or maybe a reference from your bank? The request was outrageous, and everyone in earshot knew it. No other customers in the showroom were being asked to prove their financial worthiness before even discussing vehicle features. Several people had stopped browsing entirely, their attention fully captured by the escalating tension. That won't be necessary, Sandra replied firmly. I'd like to speak with your general manager now. Margaret's face hardened. The general manager is unavailable, and I'm authorized to make these decisions. If you're serious about purchasing this vehicle, you'll understand our need to qualify potential clients, especially for our most exclusive offerings. Sandra took a step toward the Atlas Pro, her patience waning but her dignity intact. I've been patient, but this has gone far enough. I'm here as a serious customer, and I expect to be treated as such. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. As Sandra reached for the door handle of the Atlas Pro, intending to take another look at the interior while waiting for someone with more authority, Margaret stepped forward quickly. With a movement that seemed more instinctive than planned, she placed herself between Sandra and the vehicle, physically blocking her access. I think we're done here, Margaret stated firmly, her body language confrontational. This vehicle is not for test drives without financial pre-approval. Sandra stepped back, surprised by the sudden physical intrusion. I wasn't attempting to test drive it, I was simply— You need to leave, Margaret said, her voice rising. The showroom had gone completely silent, all pretense of normal business, abandoned as the confrontation reached its breaking point. We reserve the right to refuse service, and I'm exercising that right now. As Sandra stood her ground, Margaret made a critical error. Frustrated by Sandra's refusal to be intimidated, she placed her hand on Sandra's shoulder and pushed, not violently, but firmly enough to cause Sandra to stumble back a step. The physical contact was brief but unmistakable, crossing a line that shocked everyone watching. Gasps echoed across the showroom. A customer muttered, "Did she just—" The receptionist's phone was now definitely recording, held up without any attempt at concealment. Sandra regained her balance, her expression shifting from surprise to a calm resolution that somehow seemed more powerful than any display of anger could have been. She straightened her jacket, adjusted her cap, and looked directly at Margaret. "You've just made a terrible mistake," Sandra said quietly, her voice carrying in the silent showroom. "Not because of who I am, but because this is how you choose to treat people, any people, who walk through your doors." She turned slowly, scanning the showroom full of stunned faces, then looked back at Margaret one last time. "No car, no matter how luxurious, is worth sacrificing basic human dignity. Not yours, not mine, not anyone's." With those words, Sandra turned and began walking toward the exit, her steps measured and deliberate. The showroom remained frozen, in shock, as the unassuming woman in jeans and a baseball cap headed for the door, her dignity undiminished despite everything that had just occurred. What no one yet realized, though some were beginning to suspect, was exactly who had just been shoved in Precision Motors' showroom and how far-reaching the consequences of that single push would be. Sandra walked toward the dealership's glass doors, her steps measured and deliberate. The showroom remained suspended in a heavy silence, broken only by the soft sound of her footsteps against the polished floor. Behind her, whispers had begun to ripple through the crowd of onlookers. Though she couldn't make out the exact words, their urgent tone told her that recognition was spreading. She kept her eyes forward, refusing to give Margaret or Victor the satisfaction of seeing any sign of distress on her face. The confrontation had left her shaken, not because of her wounded pride, but because of what it represented. The casual cruelty, the snap judgments, the willingness to dismiss another human being based solely on appearance. These were the very things she had spent years fighting against in her work with foster children. As Sandra reached the doors, a young woman stepped quickly from behind the reception desk, moving with purpose to intercept her before she could exit. The employee was in her early 20s, with a name tag that read Zoe. Unlike Margaret and Victor, her expression carried no condescension, only concern and what appeared to be genuine embarrassment. "Excuse me," Zoe said, her voice low and urgent. "I just wanted to say, that wasn't right. What happened to you? It wasn't right at all." Sandra paused, studying the young woman's face. There was sincerity there, and perhaps a touch of fear of being seen speaking to the customer her boss had just ejected. "Thank you," Sandra replied simply. Zoe glanced nervously over her shoulder. Margaret was engaged in damage control, speaking rapidly to several customers who appeared disturbed by what they had witnessed. Victor stood awkwardly nearby, looking like he wished he could disappear entirely. "I've only been working here 3 months, Zoe continued hurriedly. "But this isn't the first time I've seen this happen. They do this to people they don't think belong here." She hesitated, then added, "Though they've never actually pushed anyone before." Sandra nodded, unsurprised, but still disappointed. Unfortunately, some people believe respect is a limited resource, only to be given to those who look a certain way or drive certain cars. Zoe bit her lip, then made a decision. She pulled her phone from her pocket, angling it so Sandra could see the screen. On it was a paused video showing Margaret and Sandra mid-confrontation. "I recorded it," Zoe whispered. "I started filming when I saw how they were treating you. It wasn't right and someone should know about it." For the first time since the confrontation began, Sandra felt a spark of something beyond calm determination. Not anger or vindictiveness, but a sense of opportunity, a chance to transform this unpleasant incident into something meaningful. "What's your name?" Sandra asked, though she could see it on the name tag. "Zoe Williams," the young woman replied. "Thank you, Zoe," Sandra said, "for your honesty and your courage. It takes both to stand up when you see something wrong." Zoe nodded, then hesitated again before speaking. "You're her, aren't you, Sandra Bullock?" Sandra's smile was answer enough. She reached up and adjusted her cap, not to hide her identity, but simply out of habit. "I thought so," Zoe continued, her voice still low. "I recognized you when you first came in, but I wasn't sure. Then when you started talking about your work with those kids, it all made sense." From across the showroom, Margaret's voice rose. Suddenly, "Zoe, what are you doing? Get back to your desk now." Zoe tensed but didn't immediately move. Instead, she looked directly at Sandra. "What are you going to do?" It was a simple question, but loaded with implication. What would Sandra Bullock, Oscar winner and one of Hollywood's most beloved actresses, do after being treated so poorly? The possibilities were numerous. She could publicly shame the dealership, call her lawyers, make a scene, demand apologies. Sandra considered for a moment before answering. "I'm going to handle this my way," she said finally, "but I'd appreciate it if you'd send me that video." Zoe nodded eagerly. "Of course. How should I—" "Here," Sandra said, pulling out her phone and opening a contact screen. "Put your number." As Zoe quickly entered her information, Margaret's voice grew louder. "Zoe, now." "You should go," Sandra said gently. "I wouldn't want you to lose your job." Zoe handed back the phone, her expression conflicted. "Maybe some jobs aren't worth keeping," she murmured, but she began moving back toward her desk. "One more thing," Sandra called after her. "Do you happen to know if there are any other dealerships in Austin that sell the Atlas Pro?" Zoe turned back briefly. "Horizon Motors on the south side. They're smaller, but they're authorized sellers too. Ask for David Ramirez. He's the owner." With a grateful nod, Sandra pushed through the glass doors and stepped out into the bright Texas sunshine. The contrast between the tense atmosphere inside and the open sky above gave her a sudden sense of freedom. She took a deep breath, letting the warm air fill her lungs and calm her racing thoughts. As she walked to her car, Sandra's mind was already working, Not on revenge, but on response. There was an opportunity here, a chance to address something, bigger than a single unpleasant encounter at a car dealership. She slid into the driver's seat of her aging SUV, smiling slightly at the irony. The vehicle that Margaret and Victor had undoubtedly judged as beneath their showroom standards had faithfully carried her and countless foster children on adventures for years. It had been present for tearful conversations, breakthrough moments, and celebrations of small victories. Its value couldn't be measured in dollars or status. Before starting the engine, Sandra pulled out her phone and saw that Zoe had already sent the video. She watched it briefly, wincing slightly at seeing the confrontation from an outside perspective. Margaret's condescension was even more apparent than it had felt in the moment, as was the physical push that had crossed the line from rude to unacceptable. Sandra set the phone down without replying yet. She needed time to think, to decide how to transform this moment into something worthwhile. As an actress, she understood the power of stories, how they could change perspectives, open hearts, and sometimes even change lives. This story was still being written, and she would make sure its ending wasn't about humiliation or revenge, but about dignity, respect, and perhaps even growth. As she drove away from Precision Motors, Sandra already knew her next destination. Horizon Motors was across town, but that gave her plenty of time to consider exactly how to proceed. One thing was certain. The world would soon know what had happened in that showroom, but not for the reasons Margaret and Victor might fear. What happened next wouldn't just be surprising. It would be transformative. By the time Sandra reached her home that afternoon, Zoe's video had already begun its journey across the internet. The young receptionist, after careful consideration, had shared it with a friend who ran a local blog focused on customer service experiences in Austin. The friend, recognizing both the significance of the incident and the identity of the customer involved, published it immediately. Within hours, the video had spread like wildfire across social media platforms. The hashtags, "Respect is free" and "Sandra Bullock deserves better," were trending nationally. Every major entertainment news outlet had picked up the story, their headlines capturing the public's outrage. Oscar winner, Sandra Bullock physically pushed. Out of luxury car dealership, Precision Motors under fire after shocking treatment of Sandra Bullock, dressed down and dismissed. How Sandra Bullock exposed elitism at Austin dealership. Unaware of the digital storm brewing, Sandra spent the afternoon researching Horizon Motors and making a few private calls. It wasn't until her assistant Mia called, her voice pitched with concern, that Sandra realized how quickly the situation had escalated. "Sandra, have you seen what's happening online?" Mia asked without preamble. "That video from the dealership is everywhere." Sandra sighed, moving to her laptop. "I figured it might get some attention, but I didn't expect it to spread so quickly." "It's gone viral," Mia explained. "People are furious. The dealership's social media accounts are being flooded with angry comments. Entertainment Tonight wants a statement, and so do about 20 other outlets." As Mia spoke, Sandra navigated to a news site where the video was prominently featured. Watching it again, she was struck by the starkness of the confrontation. The recording captured everything: Margaret's condescending tone, the baseless financial interrogation, and finally, the moment when the sales director physically pushed Sandra away from the vehicle. What stood out most, however, wasn't the push itself, but the expressions of the onlookers. The shock and disapproval on the faces of other customers spoke volumes. This wasn't just about a celebrity being mistreated. It was about basic human dignity being violated in a public space. "What do you want to do?" Mia asked, bringing Sandra back to the present. "Your publicist says he can issue a no comment or prepare a statement. Your choice." Sandra thought carefully before responding. "No statement yet. Let's wait and see how the dealership responds first." She didn't have to wait long. Within the hour, Precision Motors released a hastily prepared statement that only fueled the growing controversy. Precision Motors has always prided itself on providing exceptional service to our distinguished clientele. While we regret any misunderstanding that may have occurred during Ms. Bullock's visit, we maintain that our staff acted within company policy to ensure the security of our high-value inventory. We wish Ms. Bullock well and hope this unfortunate incident can be resolved privately. The statement, clearly crafted by a crisis management team more concerned with legal liability than genuine accountability, was received with immediate backlash. Social media users dissected its non-apology, pointing out that it implied Sandra had done something to warrant being physically removed from the premises. "They're making it worse," Mia observed when Sandra forwarded her the statement. "Did they even watch the video?" "They're scared," Sandra replied, "and they're hoping this will blow over quickly." But the controversy showed no signs of abating. By evening, entertainment news programs were running the story as their lead, with commentators and former colleagues of Sandra coming to her defense. "I've known Sandra for years," a director she had worked with stated on a popular entertainment show. "She's one of the most humble people in Hollywood. She drives a car that's over 10 years old because she doesn't care about status symbols. The idea that she was treated this way because she wasn't dressed like she was attending a premiere is exactly the kind of prejudice she's always spoken against." What truly changed the narrative, however, were the comments from viewers who began sharing their own experiences at Precision Motors and other high-end establishments. Stories poured in from people who had been ignored, dismissed, or treated with disdain based on their appearance or perceived wealth. "I saved for 2 years to buy my dream car, and the salesman wouldn't even let me test drive it because I didn't look serious." One comment read, "Went to Precision last year wearing work clothes after leaving my construction job. The receptionist asked if I was there to fix something," shared another. By nightfall, the story had evolved from an isolated incident involving a celebrity to a broader conversation about respect, judgment, and the insidious nature of appearance-based discrimination. As Sandra prepared for bed that evening, her phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. Opening it, she found a message from Zoe. "Ms. Bullock, I'm sorry about how quickly everything spread. I hope I didn't overstep. They put Margaret on administrative leave this afternoon, and the owner is in panic mode. Just thought you should know. Sandra." Smiled faintly as she typed her reply. "You have nothing to apologize for, Zoe. Sometimes the truth needs to be seen. Are you okay?" The response came quickly. "I'm fine. They don't know it was me who recorded it. Honestly, after seeing all the stories today from other people who've been treated badly there, I'm glad it's out. BTW, did you contact Horizon Motors?" "Tomorrow," Sandra texted back. "Get some rest, Zoe." As she set her phone aside, Sandra reflected on the day's events. What had begun as a simple errand to purchase a vehicle for her charity work had evolved into something far more significant. The public reaction wasn't just about her. It was about a shared experience that resonated with countless others who had faced similar prejudice. She hadn't sought this spotlight, but now that it was shining so brightly, she felt a responsibility to use it wisely. This wasn't about punishing Precision Motors or Margaret personally. It was about addressing a deeper issue, the way people judge and treat others based on superficial factors rather than their character or humanity. As Sandra drifted toward sleep, she thought about the teens in her program, young people who had been judged, dismissed, and underestimated their entire lives. Perhaps this incident, uncomfortable as it had been, could become a teaching moment not just for one dealership, but for anyone who had ever made snap judgments based on appearances. Tomorrow, she would visit Horizon Motors, but her response to today's events wouldn't end with simply buying a car elsewhere. The truth had emerged, but the story was far from over. What came next would transform this moment of conflict into an opportunity for genuine change. Morning brought no relief to Precision Motors. If anything, the night had only intensified public outrage as the video circulated globally. What had been a regional story had expanded overnight into international news, with media outlets from London to Tokyo covering the Sandra Bullock incident. James Whitmore, the owner of Precision Motors, sat in his office with his head in his hands. At 62, he had built the dealership from a modest lot into one of the most prestigious automotive retailers in Texas. Now, in less than 24 hours, the reputation he had cultivated for decades was crumbling beneath the weight of a 6-minute video. 316 negative reviews since yesterday, his social media manager reported grimly. Our rating has dropped from 4.8 stars to 1.7. The comments are, well, they're not good. James nodded wearily. And the calls? We've had 17 cancellations on pending sales. The Mastersons, the family that buys a new vehicle every year, they called specifically to say they won't be doing business with us anymore. They mentioned their daughter was a huge Sandra Bullock fan. A knock on the door interrupted them. The general manager, Paul, entered with a tablet in hand, his expression grim. The statement we released yesterday has been torn apart by every media outlet from TMZ to the Wall Street Journal, Paul said without preamble. Our PR firm is suggesting we issue a more direct apology and announce concrete steps we're taking to address the situation. James stood and walked to the window overlooking the showroom floor. Usually bustling with activity, it was eerily quiet this morning. A few salespeople stood in clusters, speaking in hushed tones. Only 2 customers browsed the inventory, a stark contrast to their typical Wednesday morning traffic. Where's Margaret now? James asked. At home, administrative leave, as we announced. She's been calling every hour asking if she still has a job. James turned back to face Paul. And does she? After what I saw in that video. Paul shifted uncomfortably. It's complicated. Legally speaking, I'm not asking legally, James interrupted. I'm asking as someone who's been in business for 40 years. Can we keep someone who treats people that way? Who physically pushes a customer? Who, by the way, happens to be one of the most beloved actresses in America? The question hung in the air, but the answer was obvious to everyone in the room. Meanwhile, across town, Zoe Williams arrived at work with a knot in her stomach. Though no one had identified her as the source of the video, she felt conspicuous as she made her way to the reception desk. Conversation stopped as she passed, colleagues watching her with expressions ranging from curiosity to suspicion. "Morning, Zoe," said Trevor, one of the salesmen who had witnessed the confrontation. "Quite a day yesterday, huh?" Zoe nodded non-committally, setting her purse beneath the desk. "You were talking to her when she left," Trevor continued, lowering his voice. "Did she say anything? About suing or anything?" "No," Zoe replied truthfully. She was actually very calm about the whole thing. Trevor seemed about to press for more details when Paul's voice came over the intercom. "All staff to the conference room in 5 minutes. Mandatory meeting." The conference room filled quickly, the usual chatter replaced by tense silence. James Whitmore stood at the head of the table, flanked by Paul and a woman Zoe didn't recognize, likely someone from their PR firm. "By now you've all seen the video," James began without preamble. "What happened yesterday was unacceptable. Period. It violated everything this dealership should stand for: respect, integrity, and exceptional service to everyone who walks through our doors." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the assembled staff. "Effective immediately, Margaret Winters is no longer employed at Precision Motors." A murmur rippled through the room. Margaret had been with the company for over 12 years and had a reputation for driving sales through aggressive tactics that occasionally bordered on the unethical. "Additionally," James continued, "we will be implementing mandatory training on inclusive customer service for every employee, from myself down. We're also revising our policies to ensure that all customers receive the same level of respect and attention, regardless of their appearance or perceived status." The PR woman stepped forward then, outlining the public statement they would be releasing within the hour. A genuine apology without qualifications or excuses, acknowledging the failure and detailing the steps being taken to address it. "We can't change what happened," James concluded, "but we can ensure it never happens again. Our reputation depends on it. Our business depends on it. And frankly, it's the right thing to do." As the meeting dispersed, Zoe remained in her seat, processing what she had heard. The changes seemed sincere, but she couldn't help wondering if they would have happened at all if the customer had been anyone other than Sandra Bullock, or if the incident hadn't been captured on video. Her phone vibrated with a news alert. Precision Motors issues full apology to Sandra Bullock, announces policy changes. The story was spreading even faster now, but with a new dimension. Beyond the outrage was a conversation about accountability and change. Across Austin, the impact continued to ripple outward. Luxury businesses of all kinds began examining their own practices, suddenly aware of the potential reputational damage of discriminatory behavior. Some proactively announced training initiatives or revised customer service policies. The hashtag #RespectIsLuxury had evolved from a criticism of Precision Motors to a broader movement addressing elitism in customer service. By mid-afternoon, the dealership had released its promised statement. Unlike the previous day's defensive response, this one was direct and unequivocal. Precision Motors acknowledges and deeply regrets the disrespectful treatment of Ms. Sandra Bullock at our dealership. The behavior shown in the video violates our core values and the respect due to every customer. We have taken immediate action, including terminating the employment of those responsible and implementing comprehensive training for all staff. We extend our sincere apologies to Ms. Bullock and to anyone who has ever felt unwelcome or disrespected in our establishment. We are committed to ensuring this never happens again. The statement concluded with a direct address to Sandra. Ms. Bullock, we failed you as a customer and as a person deserving of basic dignity. We hope for the opportunity to demonstrate our commitment to change. The apology was met with cautious approval online, with many commenters noting its directness and lack of excuses. Some remained skeptical, seeing it as damage control rather than genuine remorse. Others pointed out that it shouldn't take a celebrity being mistreated to prompt such changes. As the day wore on, the story continued to evolve. Entertainment shows dispatched reporters to Precision Motors, where they found a much quieter showroom than usual. A few loyal customers had come specifically to show support for the business amid its crisis, but they were far outnumbered by the curious who merely wanted to see the location of the now infamous incident. For James Whitmore, the day marked a painful but necessary reckoning, not just with a PR disaster, but with aspects of his business culture he had allowed to develop unchecked. As he told a reporter who managed to catch him briefly outside the dealership, sometimes it takes a moment of genuine shame to see clearly what needs to change. What no one knew yet was how Sandra Bullock herself would respond to the apology and the changes being implemented. The world was watching and waiting to see what she would do next. While Precision Motors dealt with its public relations crisis, Sandra had spent the morning in a thoughtful state of reflection. Her phone had been buzzing constantly with calls from friends, colleagues, and media outlets seeking her response to the viral video. Her publicist had compiled a list of interview requests from every major network and talk show, all eager to hear her side of the story. Sandra sat at her kitchen table, sipping tea and reading through Precision Motors' newly released apology statement. It was comprehensive and seemed genuine, a stark contrast to their initial defensive stance. Still, she wasn't interested in public shaming or prolonging the dealership's moment of crisis. Her thoughts were focused elsewhere. "What do you think?" Mia asked, sitting across from her. "The statement seems sincere," Sandra nodded. "It does. And firing Margaret was probably necessary after what happened." She set her phone down and looked up at her assistant. "But I keep thinking about those kids in our program. What would I want them to learn from this situation?" The question wasn't rhetorical. Over the years, Sandra had worked with dozens of teenagers who had faced rejection, judgment, and dismissal based on circumstances beyond their control, their family background, their economic status, or simply how they looked. She had always taught them that responding to negativity with more negativity only perpetuated cycles of harm. "I'm headed to Horizon Motors this morning," Sandra decided. "Let's see if this David Ramirez can help us find what we need for the program." An hour later, Sandra pulled into the parking lot of Horizon Motors. The dealership was considerably smaller than Precision Motors, with a modest showroom and a family-owned atmosphere. As she entered, Sandra noticed the difference immediately. There were no marble floors or ambient lighting designed to make cars gleam like museum pieces. Instead, the space felt welcoming and unpretentious. A man in his late 50s approached, her with a genuine smile. Unlike the staff at Precision Motors, his welcome didn't seem contingent on assessing her worth as a customer. "Good morning," he said warmly. "I'm David Ramirez. Welcome to Horizon Motors. How can I help you today?" Sandra returned his smile. "I'm looking for an Atlas Pro. I understand you're an authorized dealer for customizations?" "We are indeed," David replied, his expression brightening with interest rather than suspicion. "It's a fantastic vehicle. May I ask what kind of customizations you're considering?" For the next hour, Sandra experienced everything that had been missing from her visit to Precision Motors. David listened attentively to her needs, asking thoughtful questions about the wilderness therapy program and the specific requirements for the vehicle. He didn't blink at her casual attire or make assumptions about her finances. Instead, he focused entirely on helping her find exactly what she needed. "The third-row modification you're describing is definitely possible," he explained, showing her diagrams on a tablet. "We can reinforce the cargo area for your equipment and add the auxiliary power outlets throughout. The all-terrain package would include the suspension upgrades you need for those remote locations." As they discussed the details, Sandra felt herself relaxing. This was the experience she had hoped for, being treated with basic respect and dignity, her needs taken seriously regardless of how she was dressed. It wasn't until they were finalizing the customization plans that David's expression changed slightly, a flash of recognition crossing his features. "I hope this isn't inappropriate," he said carefully, "but are you Sandra Bullock?" She nodded, appreciating his discretion. "I am." David smiled but maintained his professional demeanor. "It's an honor to work with you. I've been a fan of your work for years, especially your philanthropy. My wife volunteers with foster youth as well." "That's wonderful," Sandra replied genuinely. "It's such important work." David hesitated, then added, "I saw what happened at Precision Motors. It's been all over the news. I want you to know that's not how we do business here. Every customer deserves respect, regardless of who they are or how they're dressed." "I've experienced that firsthand today," Sandra acknowledged. "It's been refreshing." As they finalized the paperwork for the custom order, Sandra made a decision. The media was still clamoring for her response to the incident, and she knew her silence couldn't continue indefinitely. But rather than focusing on the negative experience, she wanted to highlight something positive instead. "Mr. Ramirez," she said, as they concluded their business, "would you mind if I took a photo with you and your team? I'd like to share something on social media about my experience here." David was visibly surprised, but nodded enthusiastically. "We'd be honored." Later that afternoon, as speculation about her response to Precision Motors reached a fever pitch online, Sandra finally broke her silence. She posted a photo of herself with David Ramirez and the Horizon Motors team, all smiling in front of the display model of the Atlas Pro. Her caption was simple but powerful. "Today, I had the pleasure of working with David Ramirez and the incredible team at Horizon Motors to customize a vehicle for teens in my wilderness therapy program. True customer service isn't about judging people by their appearance or assumed worth. It's about listening, respecting, and helping everyone who walks through your doors. Thank you, Horizon Motors, for reminding me that dignity and respect are the real luxury. Respect is luxury." She deliberately chose to use the hashtag that had emerged from the controversy, reclaiming it for a positive message rather than criticism. Within minutes, her post had gone viral, quickly accumulating hundreds of thousands of likes and shares. What made her response so powerful wasn't what she said about Precision Motors, it was what she didn't say. By focusing on the positive experience, rather than dwelling on the negative one, she redirected the conversation toward recognition of good business practices rather than punishment of bad ones. Entertainment news outlets immediately picked up the story. With headlines praising her graceful response, Sandra Bullock takes high road after dealership incident. Instead of criticizing, Bullock highlights business that does it right. Class act, Sandra Bullock responds to controversy by promoting respect. The phone at Horizon Motors began ringing non-stop. Their social media followers increased by thousands within hours. David Ramirez found himself giving interviews to local news stations, explaining his business philosophy of treating all customers with equal respect, regardless of appearance or perceived status. As evening fell, Sandra received a text from Zoe. "Saw your post." "That was brilliant. Everyone at Precision is talking about it. You didn't attack us, but your message was so clear. Thank you for handling this with such grace." Sandra smiled as she typed her reply. Sometimes the best response to negativity isn't more negativity. It's highlighting the positive alternative. I hope things get better there. What Sandra had accomplished was more powerful than any angry statement could have been. She had transformed a moment of personal humiliation into an opportunity to celebrate those who did business the right way. In doing so, she had taught a lesson about dignity and response that resonated far beyond a single incident at a car dealership. As she prepared for bed that night, Sandra's thoughts returned to the teenagers in her program. Now she knew exactly what she would tell them about how to respond when faced with prejudice or dismissal. Don't let others' negativity define you. Instead, find and celebrate those who see your true worth. In the days following Sandra's post about Horizon Motors, something remarkable began to unfold. What had started as a controversy about one celebrity's negative experience was transforming into a broader conversation about respect in business and everyday interactions. The hashtag Respect is Luxury continued to trend, but its meaning had evolved from criticism to a celebration of positive customer service experiences. David Ramirez's phone hadn't stopped ringing. Horizon Motors, once a modest family business, overshadowed by luxury competitors like Precision Motors, was suddenly the dealership everyone was talking about. Customers flocked to the showroom, many citing Sandra's endorsement as their reason for coming. "It's been incredible," David told a local reporter who had come to interview him about the unexpected spotlight. "But we're just doing what we've always done, treating people with dignity regardless of what they're wearing or what car they currently drive." Sandra's custom Atlas Pro was now in production, with David personally overseeing the modifications. Their professional relationship had deepened into a genuine connection based on shared values and complementary missions. "I've been thinking," David said during one of Sandra's visits to check on the progress. "My wife Carmela has been volunteering with foster youth for years, but we've always wanted to do more. Your wilderness program sounds incredible." Sandra's eyes lit up with interest. "What did you have in mind? What if Horizon Motors provided maintenance and service for your program vehicles at no cost? And maybe we could work together on transportation for kids aging out of the system who need reliable vehicles to get to jobs or college." The suggestion sparked an hour-long conversation about possibilities neither had considered before. By the time Sandra left that day, the seeds of a partnership had been planted, one that would extend far beyond a single vehicle purchase. Meanwhile, at Precision Motors, change was happening in ways no one had anticipated. The showroom remained quieter than normal, but the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. James Whitmore had taken the dealership's reckoning to heart, implementing changes that went beyond mere damage control. "The incident with Ms. Bullock forced us to look in the mirror," James explained during a staff meeting. "And frankly, I didn't like what I saw. We've been so focused on exclusivity that we forgot about basic human decency." The mandatory training sessions on inclusive customer service had already begun, led by a diversity consultant who specialized in luxury retail environments. But perhaps the most surprising change came in the form of a new hiring initiative. James had offered Zoe Williams a promotion to Customer Experience Manager, a newly created position focused on ensuring every visitor received respectful treatment. "I was shocked," Zoe confided to Sandra during a phone call. "Apparently, my obvious commitment to treating all customers with dignity made me the perfect candidate. I think they figured out I was the one who recorded the video, but instead of firing me, they're asking me to help change the culture." Sandra smiled at this unexpected development. "Sometimes the most powerful change comes from within. Are you going to accept?" "I already did," Zoe replied. "If I can help make sure what happened to you never happens to anyone else, that's worth staying for." As work continued on her custom vehicle, Sandra found herself reflecting on how a single negative encounter had spiraled into something so much more significant. The story had resonated because it touched on experiences many people had faced, being judged, dismissed, or treated as less than based on superficial factors. One afternoon, while discussing the final details of the vehicle customization, Sandra shared an idea that had been forming in her mind. "The wilderness therapy program is just one part of what these kids need," she explained to David. Many of them have never been treated with basic respect by authority figures or institutions. They've been judged their entire lives based on circumstances beyond their control. David nodded, understanding immediately. And that affects how they see themselves and their place in the world. Exactly, Sandra confirmed. What if we created something bigger than just transportation for the wilderness program? What if we developed a full initiative focused on teaching respect while providing practical skills? From this conversation emerged the concept for Respect Drives Change, a program that would combine Sandra's work with foster youth and David's automotive expertise. The initial idea was simple. Teens in the program would learn automotive maintenance and customer service skills at Horizon Motors while experiencing a work environment built on mutual respect. The program would provide practical job training while reinforcing the message that dignity wasn't something to be earned through status or appearance. It was a fundamental right. For young people who had often been overlooked or underestimated, this message was transformative. As word of the developing program spread, other businesses in Austin began reaching out, offering internships, mentorship, and resources. What had begun as a negative incident at a car dealership was blossoming into a community-wide commitment to treating young people with respect and providing them with tangible opportunities. The most unexpected development came 3 weeks after the incident, when Sandra received an email from James Whitmore requesting a meeting. After careful consideration, she agreed, suggesting they meet at a neutral location, a local coffee shop far from both dealerships. James arrived early, visibly nervous as he waited for Sandra. When she entered, simply dressed in jeans and a light sweater, he stood to greet her. "Ms. Bullock, thank you for agreeing to meet with me," he began, his voice sincere. "I want to apologize personally for what happened at my dealership." "There's no excuse for how you were treated." Sandra nodded, accepting his words without interrupting. "I followed what you're doing with Horizon Motors and this new program you're developing," James continued. "It's inspired me to think about how Precision Motors could contribute meaningfully. Beyond just changing our internal practices," he slid a folder across the table. Inside was a proposal for Precision Motors to provide funding for 5 full scholarships to the Respect Drives Change program, specifically for teens who wanted to pursue careers in automotive technology or sales. "It's not about publicity or making amends," James added quickly. "It's about ensuring something positive comes from this situation. These young people deserve opportunities, regardless of their background or circumstances." Sandra studied the proposal thoughtfully. It was comprehensive and showed genuine thought rather than a hasty attempt at reputation management. After a moment, she looked up at James. "This isn't what I expected," she admitted. "But I appreciate the sincerity behind it. The program could certainly use the support." As they discussed the details, a realization dawned on Sandra. The transformation happening wasn't just about one dealership learning a lesson or one celebrity using her platform for good. It was about how a moment of conflict, handled with dignity rather than vengeance, could ripple outward to create genuine change. By the time they parted, the foundation had been laid for collaboration rather than division, not erasing what had happened, but building something meaningful from it. A pathway forward based on mutual respect and shared purpose. As Sandra drove away from the meeting, she couldn't help but reflect on how differently this story could have unfolded. In choosing kindness over condemnation, she had opened doors not just for herself but for dozens of young people who would benefit from the expanding program. The final vehicle was nearly ready. But more importantly, so was the movement it had inspired. 6 months had passed since the incident at Precision Motors. The custom Atlas Pro that had started it all gleamed in the early morning sunlight as Sandra loaded the final supplies into its meticulously designed cargo area. The vehicle had been transformed from a standard SUV into something extraordinary, not because of luxurious features, but because of the purpose built into every modification. "That should be the last of it," Sandra said to Mia, who was checking items off a list. "Water bottles, first aid kits, trail maps, journals, and snacks," Mia added with a smile. "Lots of snacks. Teenagers are always hungry." Today marked the inaugural trip for the Wilderness Therapy Program, the culmination of months of planning and preparation. 8 teenagers from the foster care system would be experiencing their first 3-day expedition into the Texas Hill Country, a journey designed to build confidence, teamwork, and self-reliance. As Sandra made final adjustments to the equipment, a small convoy of vehicles pulled into the meeting point. David Ramirez stepped out of the lead car, followed by his wife, Carmela. Behind them, Zoe emerged from her vehicle, and surprisingly, James Whitmore from his. "Looks like everyone made it," Sandra observed, walking over to greet them. The past 6 months had seen the Respect Drives Change initiative grow beyond anyone's expectations. What had begun as a simple concept combining automotive education with wilderness therapy had evolved into a comprehensive program supported by businesses across Austin. David Ramirez had converted part of Horizon Motors' facility into a teaching garage where program participants learned basic automotive skills. Zoe, while maintaining her role at Precision Motors, volunteered as a mentor, helping teens develop customer service and professional skills. And James Whitmore had not only provided the promised scholarships, but had also personally taught classes on business ethics and respectful leadership. "The kids should be arriving any minute," Sandra told the group. "They're excited but nervous. For most of them, this is their first time doing anything like this." As if on cue, a van from the foster care agency pulled up, and 8 teenagers emerged, their expressions a mixture of anticipation and uncertainty. They ranged in age from 15 to 17, each carrying a small backpack with personal items. Everything else would be provided by the program. Sandra stepped forward, greeting each teen by name. There was no hint of the Hollywood star about her, just a woman genuinely committed to these young people and their growth. She introduced the team of adults who would be accompanying them on the journey, explaining each person's role. "Before we head out," Sandra said to the group, "I want to share something with you. This program exists because of a moment when I was judged unfairly based on how I looked." She gestured toward James and continued, "But instead of that moment remaining negative, it transformed into something meaningful because people were willing to learn, change, and collaborate." The teens listened attentively, some nodding in recognition of experiences they'd had themselves. "During our time together," Sandra continued, "you'll learn practical skills, how to navigate terrain, set up camp, work as a team. But the most important thing you'll learn is your own worth. Not based on what you wear, where you come from, or what others think of you, but based on who you are and how you treat others." As the group prepared to depart, a news van pulled up. The story of Respect Drives Change had captured public attention, and a local station had asked to cover the program's official launch. Sandra had agreed not for publicity, but because the message deserved wider reach. The reporter approached with a camera operator, asking Sandra to explain the program's origins and mission. "What began as an uncomfortable moment has become something beautiful," Sandra explained. "These young people face judgment and assumptions every day based on their status as foster children. Our program shows them that respect isn't something you earn by looking a certain way or having certain possessions. It's something everyone deserves simply because they're human." When asked about the vehicle that had sparked the controversy, Sandra smiled and patted the Atlas Pro's hood affectionately. "This car represents something important, how we can transform challenges into opportunities. Every modification we made was designed with these kids in mind, to give them experiences that build confidence and self-worth." After the brief interview, it was time to depart. The teens loaded into the Atlas Pro and accompanying vehicles, their initial nervousness giving way to excitement as the journey began. Driving along the winding road that led to their destination, Sandra glanced in the rearview mirror at the young faces behind her. Each teen carried their own story, their own struggles, their own experiences of being underestimated or overlooked. But over the next 3 days, they would discover strengths they didn't know they possessed. The program had already expanded beyond its initial concept. 3 other cities had reached out about implementing similar initiatives. A documentary filmmaker was creating a short film about the program's impact. Businesses across industries were reconsidering their approach to customer service, recognizing that respect wasn't a luxury, but a fundamental right. As they reached the trailhead, Sandra gathered the group for final instructions before they began their hike to the first campsite. "Remember," she told them, "the challenges we face on this trip aren't obstacles, they're opportunities to grow. Just like what happened at..." That dealership wasn't just a negative experience, it was the beginning of something meaningful. One of the teens, Maria, who had been particularly quiet until now, raised her hand. "Ms. Bullock, I just wanted to say thank you, not just for this trip, but for showing us how to respond when people treat us badly. Most adults tell us to ignore it or fight back, but you showed there's another way." Sandra smiled, touched by the insight. "The way we respond to difficulty shapes who we become. When we choose dignity over anger, compassion over revenge, we create possibilities that wouldn't exist otherwise." As the group began their trek into the wilderness, Sandra felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The incident at Precision Motors could have been just another unpleasant experience, quickly forgotten. Instead, it had catalyzed a movement with ripple effects touching hundreds of lives. 6 months ago, a sales director had judged Sandra based on her casual clothes and assumed she didn't belong in a luxury dealership. Today, because of how she had responded to that judgment, 8 teenagers were learning that they belonged everywhere, that respect wasn't determined by appearance or circumstance, but was their birthright as human beings. That was the true luxury, the ability to transform negativity into opportunity, to respond to disrespect with dignity, and to create meaning from moments that might otherwise diminish us. As Sandra watched the teens navigate the trail ahead, their faces brightening with each small success, she knew this was just the beginning. The legacy of that day at the dealership wouldn't be about conflict or viral videos or public apologies. It would be about the lives changed through the simple but revolutionary idea that respect drives change, in individuals, in businesses, and in communities, and that was a legacy worth building one step at a time.